Good afternoon, Britain. Let's talk now about those shocking figures released today that less than 1% of those arriving on small boats since 2020 have been deported from the United Kingdom. Is this a major Home Office failure, or is this what the system is designed to deliver? Well, joining us now to discuss this and more is the author and broadcaster Emma Wolfe and Novara Media's contributing editor Michael Walker.
Well, yes, it's been revealed to the Home Affairs Committee that the Home Office hasn't particularly been doing a good job across a number of different metrics, Emma. We've got this news that only 1% of migrants who have arrived in small boats since 2020 have actually been deported. There's also the cost of the Bibby Stockholm barge has been revealed, and it is quite astonishing. £41,000 per day is what it's costing the taxpayer, £22.5 million contract. What's going on in the Home Office, Emma?
What's not going on in the Home Office? I mean, you can't really... I see Sunak trying to spin this, but there's really no way to spin it. There's just the record speaks for itself. Less than 1% of people removed from those small boats. And when you take out non-Albanian small boat crossings, that's 99.6% of migrants crossing on small boats across the Channel who haven't been removed.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we
just over 1,000 of the 112,000 people.
We get harsh rhetoric from the government, don't we, Michael? But it seems like they're far better at the Home Office anyway. It's far better at dishing out the visas than it is about deporting anyone who arrives illegally.
Well, I think the rhetoric's the important thing to focus on here. And I mean, this is the issue
really?
where...
Not the stats?
Well, no, I mean, the rhetoric in terms of the difference between what we're seeing them saying and what they're doing. So I think whether left, right, whether pro-migrant, anti-migrant, the thing that everyone agrees on is that the Home Office isn't fit for purpose and doesn't work very well. And I think this is potentially a story about austerity, because you had cuts to the Home Office of 25%. What happened? It took much, much longer to process people's claims. So I looked it up earlier. So 20,000 people, that was the backlog in 2010. By 2022, it was 170,000 people. So that's the people who are waiting for their claims to be processed. Now, that's not just because of an increase in numbers. So actually, the record number of people who came in a single year as asylum seekers was in 2002. And we didn't get this crisis then because we had a state that actually worked a little bit better because it hadn't been cut to the bone. So I think this is a story really about inefficiency and how we have a Tory government that for a very, very long time has liked to sound as if it's very tough on migration, but actually its policies don't make any sense.
I don't think it's just austerity. I think it's also ideology. We know we've had leaks from the Home Office, people saying we've had no intention of really taking migration seriously. We're never going to put these policies into action. So,
but why would that have changed since? Because I suppose what I'm saying is that there's been a change since the New Labour years and the Tory years, and I don't think it was that people got more liberal. I think it's that the system stopped working.
Might it be that there is a deliberate policy here? There was a fascinating interview with Robert Jenrick when he was Migration Minister about 6 months ago, where he was asked, why don't you speed up processing? And he says, well, you might not want to speed up processing because it would encourage more to come. Might it be that the government has actually perhaps deliberately slowed down processing, deliberately had lots of people languishing in those backlog queues, simply because if they ran too efficient a system, they believe that's a magnet?
But it depends on what kind of situation you put people in when they're in a backlog. If they're able just to live in this country and live their lives, that's one thing. Then it would encourage people just to come over and sit in that backlog forever. But if people are actually being kind of detained forcibly or put on the Bibby Stockholm or whatever, it depends what you do, what your whole setup is.
It does seem that there is this odd sort of thing, though, Michael, that the United Kingdom has signed up to all of these treaties that, in many ways, the United Kingdom helped set up in the wake of the Second World War, at a time when international migration was much, much lower than I think it could even ever be thought to be now. And according to those treaties, millions and millions and millions and millions of people around the world have the right to move to the UK. Now, the UK doesn't want to withdraw from those treaties, so it just wants to frustrate the process of that moving. And it seems like there's this sort of odd... Like, on the one hand, there's these legal obligations, but on the other, the way to try and prevent people moving is not to ditch the legal obligations, it's just to make things awful and tricky.
Well, I think you were onto something before when you were talking about there being a vested interest in not getting rid of these backlogs, in not making these decisions quicker. And I don't think that's as a deterrent, because it's quite difficult to deter people from coming. I think the way to deter people would to essentially turn everyone back. Now, there's massive legal problems with that, massive moral problems with that. Sending a few people to Rwanda isn't going to do anything. And holding up people for years or 2 years at a time also isn't going to deter people because people are leaving desperate situations. So I think they've actually created this crisis because they want us to be talking about migration. People keep saying, why is Rishi Sunak talking about stopping the boats when he can't do it? It's because he doesn't want to talk about the NHS. He doesn't want to talk about interest rates. He doesn't want to talk about anything else because he knows that people really hate him.
I might agree with you on that, were it not for the fact that we've heard the Home Office considering an amnesty to those who've come from certain countries. We've also heard of interviews at the Home Office for asylum claims being cut drastically to hasten the process. So where does that fit in with that theory?
Well, you could say it's now got to its limit, right? So they need to be seen to be getting down the backlog. So what they said, we're getting down the backlog. You created the backlog, right? So I think they have, and this is where, you know, I get very cynical about the government, almost conspiratorial, where I think they've almost concocted this crisis because they would prefer to fight the next election on migration
That's to imagine they're
than on the economy.
No, the reason he's talking about it is
That is an argument against that, sorry.
A, because it's easy to make pledges. You can make 5 little neat pledges, put them on a headstone, put them on a card, hand it out, whatever. You make the pledges and then you go, uh-oh, haven't met any of them. Or, oh, they weren't pledges, they were kind of aspirations. Secondly, he's talking about it because it's a massive voters issue.
I think
it's going to be an election. This is what people care about. So he responds to it and then they can't follow through.
And yet,
it's that
in
simple. It's not even.
2015,
The
the
NHS was always
Conservative
top and he talks
Party,
about-
the Conservative Party started talking a lot about migration in 2013, 2014. They then had advisers come in as the long campaign for that 2015 election took off that advised them to stop talking about migration because it was driving voters not to the Conservative Party, but it was driving Conservative voters to then UKIP.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the same thing is happening now. The more Rishi talks about stopping the boats, it's not making people think, oh, this is the guy that we need to stop the boats. It's making Conservatives think these boats are a real problem and they're finding other parties on the right.
I don't know. I think people know it is an issue, don't you?
They do, and they really care. People really do care about this now. And yeah, they've have sort of it's chicken and egg, isn't it? They're feeding the kind of immigration beast. It's very visible. We talk about small boats because that's the visible problem. You can stand on the cliffs and talk about the boats coming in, whereas you know you don't talk. We can't see the 600, 700,000 net migration people coming in. We just feel it all around us.
But isn't it interesting that we don't feel loads of Ukrainians? We don't feel loads of people from Hong Kong. I don't sort of walk down the street and see loads of people of Chinese origin. Like, I mean, it doesn't feel like there's been hundreds of thousands of Hong Kongers, but there have.
I think in some areas, say if you're in a university town, you might notice, you know, a lot of students, for example. Or if you're down on the coast, I have friends who live down on sort of Kent coast, and they do talk about a lot of immigrants coming to those areas. So I think it depends where you are. You know, London is maybe a bit more dispersed.
Michael Stevens written in and he says there's one reason why the backlog is so long. Decisions are made regularly enough, but the problem is lawyers. The appeal process is used and used and used until it's exhausted. So is it that once they're in the system, it's very hard to actually deport someone, even if they don't really have a genuine asylum claim, because there are just so many legal hurdles to go through, and that's what the government is trying to, at least, curtail in one way or another.
I mean, I think this is one of those situations where, again, we need to look at what's changed. So, as far as I know, there aren't any significant laws that have come in since Labour were last in government. What's happened is that we've defunded the Home Office, and so everything is completely dysfunctional. And obviously, if you're a lawyer, what you want to find is a hole in the case of the Home Office official. And if you've got a bunch of... I mean, I think one of the big problems in the Home Office was that in basically all departments, their initial cuts was by giving people voluntary redundancy. So they say, do you want to go? We'll give you a leaving package. What does that do? It means that anyone with any experience in every department leaves, and then 5 years later or 6 or 7 years later, they realise, oh, God, we've got to hire a load more people because suddenly this backlog is built up, and then everyone in the department is new. So I think you've probably got a lot of Home Office officials, putting together very bad cases which are full of holes, and that's why it gets sort of tied up in the courts for years.